Hello and welcome to the final episode of Jermyn Street Theatre's Prompt Corner. Today we're talking all about our production of The Tempest, which ran at the beginning of 2020, before the COVID-19 lockdown happened. Our guests today are Michael Pennington, who played Prospero, Tom Littler, director of the performance, Whitney Kehinde, who played Ariel in The Tempest, and Hester Lees-Jeffries, an academic who has written the blog Storm Tossed. I hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Tom. I run Jermyn Street Theatre, and The Tempest was the last play that I directed there before we had to close in the middle of March. So hopefully it will also be the next play that I direct there when we reopen.
Whitney?
Hi, I'm Whitney. I play Ariel in The Tempest for about a week before a global pandemic happened, but hopefully it'll come back.
Perfect. And Michael?
Tom, I'm Michael, and thanks for the job. It was brief, but it was lovely. And we can dream of doing it again, or at least doing something like this, or maybe broadcasting it, or maybe filming it, or some damn thing or other. But it was wonderful while it lasted. It was the most wonderful play, and I'd actually been waiting a rather long time in my life to do the part of Prospero, which is what I did.
And
I'm Hester. I'm an interloper. I'm an academic. I'm a lecturer at Cambridge University, and I love Shakespeare. I teach Shakespeare, and from October last year, I was writing a daily blog about The Tempest called Storm Tossed, reading a few lines every day and writing about them. And it was really great to talk to Tom about the play, and I'm really delighted to be here to talk a little bit more about the play, having finished writing about it every day last month.
Very good. Well done.
Thank you all so much. So I thought we'd start by, should we go straight into it, having a look at the play. I've lined up a clip to start with from Act 5, Scene 1, which I thought would be sort of pertinent. The period of time that we have at Jermyn Street sort of called our little non-production period is called Brave New World. So I thought we might start with that eponymous little quote.
Sweet Lord, you play me false.
No, my dear love. Well, not for the world.
Yes, for a score of kingdoms you should wrangle. And I would call it fair play.
Disprove the vision of the island, one dear son shall I twice lose.
A most high miracle. Though the seas threaten, they are merciful. I have cursed them without cause.
Now all the blessings of a glad father compass thee about. Arise and say how thou camest here.
Oh, wonder. How many goodly people are there here? How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it.
'Tis new to thee.
Tom, would you like to give us sort of a little intro as to where we are in the play there, and what's kind of being set up, and then the significance of Miranda's line, played so beautifully by Kirsty Bushell?
Well, it's the most wonderful moment in the play because Shakespeare has managed to keep all the different plots apart. So it must be the most bewildering island because although it's clearly very small, he's managed to keep all of his different groups of people on different parts of the island so they never collide. And now finally, we have Miranda and Ferdinand, who have been together for almost the whole time, and Prospero knows that they are there, and Prospero sort of does a magician's reveal almost of them to what you might think of as the court group, the shipwrecked courtiers, including Ferdinand's father, Alonso. So it's the moment when the sections of the play come together for the first time, I suppose. And for Miranda, it's the most extraordinary thing because it's the first time she has seen any people other than her dad, or Caliban, or this incredible new friend and now husband Ferdinand. And suddenly her eyes are open to all of the rest of humanity. I mean, it's theatre magic.
Yeah.
Mm. And Hester, in your blog, you focus on this moment as something that kind of, you emphasize the nature of teaching in this sort of moment, as in, you've got a lovely bit about the stories that we've experienced throughout the rest of the play, like being made through new eyes, being made through Miranda's kind of like wonderment, as it were.
Well, I think it's ironic to be recording this on a sunny afternoon when I should be at my students' graduation. This is a play about teaching, partly, and one of the wonderful things about teaching is re-encountering things that you thought you knew really well, but you see them afresh through the eyes of young people, and it's very moving to hear those lines in this context. And one of the things that I think is also so moving about this moment is that what Miranda is looking at is the reunion between Ferdinand and his father, as much as all these new people. And so what she is seeing is also the possibility of relationship, the possibility of not being alone, of a brave new world of relationship, of people who are in relationship with each other. And in our current circumstances, I think that's a powerful thing to be reminded of, that it's not just about encounters with individuals, it's the encounters between people and growing in relationship with other people, which is being modelled in this moment. It can be cheapened. You can go for a cheap laugh there. Oh, brave new world that has such creatures in it. But it doesn't have to be. And in this moment, the brave new world is not some kind of dystopia yet. It's a really open-hearted, wholehearted embracing of this new possibility.
Mm. That's wonderful. And Michael, your line straight after it, the kind of the "'tis new to thee," is a lovely little. Well,
it certainly is the last word on the subject, isn't it? I think there's something so gorgeous in this, as Tom was saying, which is so typically Shakespearean, as he writes what, after all, was almost certainly the very last play of his career. And as always, and he does it time and time again, you want the lovers to come together at the end. It's like Viola and Sebastian. They're not lovers in Twelfth Night, but they're twin brother and sister, of course. We want the lovers to come together and for it to be all right. The idea of having them playing chess while everybody else waits is also very good, because it's in a way the youth are taking over and they will be together, but they're not in any hurry. So all these people whose life has been so affected by Prospero and have to wait, till they finish the particular Knight to King 4, the Miranda might even take. So I like it very much when you take your time, as if they could say, can you not disturb me just at the moment, please? That's also playable, because Shakespeare always has that comedy potential going alongside with his deeply lyrical and heartfelt, really, as Hester said, this heartfelt desire to find love. And then it turns into this moment, as you say, famous lines when she's so impressed, this brave new world that hath such creatures in it. And Prospero, who has after all organized this stage and managed it, for all his complaints and all the less agreeable parts of his character, he has done this for them. And he just can't help the bitterness coming into his mind when he considers that she thinks that this a brave new world, such creatures in it. And he can only say with profound sincerity and truthfulness, it's new to thee. And when you think of how I was banished, he would go on, banished from my dukedom, why this happened and that happened, and then he did this, and Alonso did that, and everyone's done me wrong for all my life. That sort of slightly petulant, endlessly put upon self-victimization that he feels is also in there. So there's lots of different things in there. Though essentially, in terms of the narrative, as everybody else is saying, it is the absolute necessity to have this is what we've been waiting for. The future is guaranteed. These two young people will make the world better. And as for the rest of us, in our 60s and 70s, Alonso, Gonzalo, and certainly Prospero, might as well just hang up their boots and die. That's a rather cynical interpretation, but it's Shakespeare's always got that irony. He's always got that paradox between a beautiful thing and its opposite, even when he's celebrating the beautiful thing.
Yeah. Whitney, I'd love to hear from you, like on a sort of wider level, about this idea of kind of seeing through fresh eyes. What was the experience of being in the Tempest like for you? Because I don't know, you were amongst a cast that was a lot older than you, and
I know. I realised at the table. It was definitely a job of learning. It was a job where, but
I
with
find that
Shakespeare,
too.
yeah, I think with everyone. But when you're playing alongside with people with just incredible credits and decades of experience on you. You can only just watch and learn, really, honestly. And it has been, a very interesting time, and especially playing a character who's invisible and only Michael can see me as well. That was something. I've never played an invisible person before, so that was really interesting. It was a really fun part, but in a way a kind of lonely part in that sense, because I kind of was playing with Michael and sort of then just interweaving within things. So yeah, it was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we have a listen to some Ariel bits? I think I've got Ariel's first little scene in here.
Cease more questions. Thou art inclined to sleep. 'Tis a good dullness, and give it way. I know thou canst not choose. Come away, servant. Come. I'm ready now. Approach, my Ariel. Come.
All hail, great master, grave Sir Hail. I come to answer thy best pleasure, be it to fly, to swim, to dive into the fire, to ride on the curled clouds. To thy strong bidding task Ariel and all her quality.
Hast thou, spirit, performed to point the tempest that I bade thee?
To every article.
So this moment is very near the beginning of the play. This just after we've had the storm, isn't it? And I suppose we're kind of settling into the narrative of the play. I mean, Whitney, would you like to tell us a little bit about that first scene, what that entrance is like, and just entrances in general in that?
Yeah, it's the character that's the magical character, and in terms of the audience don't know what they're going to see, and then you kind of see me in an apron, so it's like, oh, there's no one flying in and painted blue, what is going on? But it was really interesting to work with and a lot to play for in that scene. Like the stakes were high and going into it. But sorry, I forgot the question.
No question. Hester, you refer in your blog to Ariel as they. I mean, what's the kind of decision behind that? You put a lot of pressure on this moment, I'm right in saying, on the questions that when you read the text, the audience is asking what Ariel does look like, as Whitney has referred to, kind of like what are they expecting when this first other character comes on in the scene. Might you be able to tell us a little bit about the sort of background to that?
Choosing to refer to Ariel as they was partly an experiment to see what it was like to write about a character like that.
Yeah.
But I found it really interesting because it seemed to me a way of thinking about Ariel's in-betweenness and thinking about ways of differentiating Ariel from Caliban as well. And the invisibility and the shape-shifting and the fluidity of Ariel seemed to me could be productively thought about in ways in which we're currently thinking about gender, for instance. And so pushing that into the pronouns was a way of, I suppose, keeping that in the foreground of how I was thinking about Ariel as a character. I did go through the text, and actually I think he is used once in the text. But interestingly, in the performance history of The Tempest, historically, Ariel has been played by a woman a lot in the 19th and early 20th century tradition. And then very often from the mid-20th century onwards, Ariel has more often been played by a male actor. But recently, there have been more female actors playing Ariel. So I'm interested in our own cultural moment at what Ariel might mean, and how the performance choices that are made about Ariel can be reflected in how we think about the character. The Tempest is a play where we have these two non-human characters, which necessarily have to be played by human actors. And so there's always a kind of paradox in that you can fantasize about what they're going to look like if you've got a really enormous CGI budget. But ultimately, they are almost always going to have 2 legs and 2 arms and walk upon the ground. Or, if you can run to a flying harness, maybe a little bit of that. But that kind of tension between the magic that we see in the writing and on the page, and the way in which it's not necessarily going to be reduced to a human actor, but Ariel has to be embodied in some way, and thinking about the qualities of that embodiment and how that might relate to how we think about that character and write and speak about that character seemed to me a really interesting and quite important thing to do, actually, for lots of reasons.
Yeah. And so, Whitney, I mean, that sounds like a lot of pressure on Ariel. did you feel that pressure a lot, Whitney? Was that something
yeah,
you solve?
yeah.
And how much have you kind of like look a lot at other people's interpretations of the character as Hester has charted that history? Was that something you were quite...
Oh, that's a dangerous question. I don't think I would ever have dared ask Whitney whether she'd looked at anybody else.
I did actually. Sort of, I kind of was reading about who's played the part in the past. I'd watched, was it Helen Mirren, the film, The Tempest, I think it's 2010, with Ben Whishaw as Ariel. And then I watched the RSC's version, but I did pay attention a lot. But then it at the end of the day, like, I'm not Ben Whishaw and I'm not those people, so I kind of have to find my own version of this character, as cheesy as that sounds. Yeah, and it was just kind of like, how can I create that? I did find pressure, because I was like, but I'm not flying and I'm not doing this. And I mean, if you ask anyone in a house room, I was just doing a lot of weird things, like trying to come to a conclusion about what I should do in each scene, and working with Julia, the movement director, who was so helpful in terms of like, just play each scene as like what objective you're trying to achieve, and it will come as a through line. So yeah.
I mean, we threw a lot of paint at the wall, didn't we?
We did.
It's interesting because all we started really was with you and the play, and some production concepts, but it wasn't as though we had an immediate starting point of going, she's definitely a 1,000-year-old spirit.
Oh yeah.
or, and it was a sort of trial and error process, wasn't it? Where you just kept having to turn up every day with new offers until we both began to feel happy that we were.
Yeah,
it was really it was amazing in the end what you created, but it is a weird thing, isn't it, playing a spirit?
It is. An ageless spirit of no particular, it's like one of the characters in Shakespeare that it's not really described that much, like, so it's like the actor kind of has to just do it. And
and we sort of came to the conclusion in the end that Ariel Ariel is a spirit of some kind that has come to be locked or imprisoned in a human frame. Which then means that Whitney as Ariel can walk like a woman. And not walk around like a spirit.
That took a lot of that was really helpful as well, like, because I remember coming to you all the time being like, I don't know what this is, but it's like, maybe you're just, and especially with just Prospero, maybe you just are Ariel in a relaxed state, and then obviously when it comes to you doing the tricks and becoming a harpy and everything, then you're creating that, but you don't need to try so hard when it's just you and Prospero.
And you speak about speaking about like the role or the character as I suppose you find yourself fitting into it. Michael, you mentioned in your little hello that you've been wanting to play Prospero for a long time. Now, what was that process like for you, finally getting to do it? What's that like?
It was fantastic. I mean, it's one of those, if you've done an awful lot of Shakespeare, which as it awfully happens, I have, there comes a point when it's the last one you're likely to do, because as it's thought to be his last play, it clearly was written right at the end of his life. That quality seems to transfer itself onto the actor as well. And you think, well, when I've done Prospero, that's it. I'll burn my book and break my staff and all the other things. Actually, I hope not. It's not that you're actually going to retire, but it has that reputation. And at the end of the play, when he says, now my charms are all o'erthrown and what strength I have is mine own, does sound like an actor playwright, which is what he was both things, saying goodbye to his public after 30 years of a relationship with them, probably from a distance. He was probably at home in Stratford at the time. I doubt if he was involved very much with the first production, which, by the way, was almost certainly done in the Blackfriars Theatre, not in the Globe Theatre that we think about when we think of Shakespeare, but in this indoors theatre, court theatre, which is very unusual because it had flying equipment of a kind that we would recognize now, which the Globe certainly didn't have. And, you know, it was a social event. They were very, very, very posh and well-heeled, the Blackfriars crowd. And, you know, if they wanted to, they'd get up and walk across the stage to the other side to get a better seat right in the middle of the action. They were completely uncontrollable, the audience. But they did have the mechanics to lower gods and goddesses down, to bring Ariel in sometimes. I'm quite sure they would have had hydraulics of some rather primitive kind. There's a point in the play when Ariel and Prospero are having a scene together, playing a scene together, and the scene stops. And then it goes on to Act 5, Scene 1, the next scene, and they just continue their conversation. And there's a theory, and I think it's almost certainly true, that at various times when they played at the Blackfriars, the candles would go out and they'd just have to, trim the candles and light them all again and set them up, and then start the play again. There would be sort of unnatural breaks when it all went up. So it's kind of chaotic situation for the last play of our most famous playwright. But in terms of an actor's life, what I loved about him, and I wasn't altogether expecting it because I had been asked to play it once or twice before, never had felt sufficiently satisfied that I had enough of an idea about the part and the director in question. A couple of them didn't seem very clear about what they wanted the show to be, whether they wanted it to be about colonialism in the early 17th century in England, which it was based on a real event of a shipwreck, and in the Bermudas and so on. And there's a sort of whole history behind it. Or is it to do with intolerance and the cruelty, is racial cruelty between Prospero, for instance, and the others? What is it really about? Or is it the man saying goodbye? And as a result, Prospero is a wonderfully layered character. And I've over and over and over again seen him, because he has about 20 minutes at the beginning of the play when he's basically telling his daughter for the first time what his enemies did to him and how he came to be. And there's anger pouring out of him still after all these years, and the need to tell his daughter at last why she finds herself in this desert island, and his need for revenge by bringing them all here and destroying their life. It's a real revenge story. But it's not the truth about Prospero, really, because essentially he's a man of great sensitivity, great love for his daughter, and in general terms, very loyal and afraid. But he must himself have been through a most terrible crisis of rejection and found himself on an island where he can't have wanted to be, learning to be a magician, presumably, and also somehow finding Ariel and Caliban. Caliban was less welcome as someone to meet, but Ariel, in whom, by the way, I can't let this pass, Whitney did the most wonderful, wonderful performance as Ariel. It was wonderfully physically realized and so great to act with, really great, because she too is a magician. I'm saying she from now on forever for Ariel. She too is a magician. She can, as a harpy, snap her fingers and a great banquet appears on the stage. Big stage management problem, you can imagine. You know, she creates the shipwreck. She's the one who actually executes the plan of shipwrecking the boat just at the beginning of the play on the island's borders. She flies through the air. She pretends to be a harpy. She brings on spirits who are dressed as dogs. See, you know, there's a sort of endless series of effects, of tricks, in fact, of a routine that she does. So she's just as gifted a magician as Prospero. Prospero just gives the orders. And of course, what in the end you do get with Prospero is this extraordinary combination whereby he's part. I've seen many productions in which he's played very grandly and rather operatically and rather by, you know, a senior actor of the old style. But actually, he's very vulnerable and very sympathetic in moments. And when he says goodbye to I'll mention it because it is worth, I think, mentioning to anybody who plays it, he resigns his position. He's going back to Naples and everything's going to be all right. And he addresses all the magic forces he's been in the control of during the course of the play. He says, ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with pintless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune. And he goes on as a long speech, about 30 lines, in which he's saying goodbye to all the forces that have helped him in his magical career. And it's very, very delicate and loving. Ye whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms. It's almost like Midsummer Night's Dream with fairies doing clever little things. But then something takes over in him and he says, by whose aid, weak masters though ye be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azure vault, set roaring war to the dread rattling thunder by given fire. Well, I'll spare you the rest of it. But he suddenly becomes incredibly angry at what's been done to him. And then at the end, he again very simply says, in a few minutes I'll drown my book, and deeper than did ever plummet sound. I'll break my staff. I mean, deeper than did ever plummet sound, drown my book. So there's all the time playing in him, like all great Shakespearean characters. You know, the image they put out to the world, which may be compounded of anger, jealousy, all sorts of things, and an inner life which is much less secure and really quite vulnerable and deeply sympathetic. And I just had this idea, if I could play Prosper not just like a Shakespearean hero, but also perhaps like a little bit of a Chekhov character, you know, or something like that, and mix the naturalism that we've grown up in my lifetime anyway, in the theatre, particularly towards Shakespeare. And which, by the way, I'll just go off on a slight thing. Ian Holm, who died last week, who was a huge influence on me and one of the greatest Shakespearean actors that I've ever known. And he was very much responsible in the 60s for turning Shakespearean actor into a modern craft, because he played it as if it was a movie, but you could always hear him and it always made sense. And I've always aspired to that. And I think a lot of our generation have, and Prospero gave me a chance to do the same thing, which I hope I managed to do. That's the end of my long speech.
Amazing. I mean, you've both mentioned now a couple of times this Harpy speech, and maybe should we go to that, because that's actually, I've got that queued up, and maybe we speak a little bit about stagecraft.
I'll feed, although my last. No matter, since I feel the best is past. Brother, my lord the Duke, stand to, do as we.
You are 3 men of sin, whom destiny hath caused to belt-chap you. And on this island where man doth not inhabit, you 'mongst men being most unfit to live, I have made you mad. You fools! I and my fellows are ministers of fate. The elements of whom your swords are tempered may as well wound the loud winds, or with Bamoptat stabs kill the still closing waters as diminish one dow that's in my bloom.
Michael, when you mentioned the Harpy scene, Hester sort of gave a little wry smile, as if it was indeed a very difficult scene to put into real life. Do you want to give us a little bit of the background to that? Because I mean, I never saw the performance before it went. We only had a couple of days, but presumably this was a bit of a difficult.
Plead innocent, because I don't actually have anything to do with the Harpy. It's the burial side. Is it not, Whitney? I don't think I ever said you dress up as a. If so, he does it in the dressing room.
Yeah. In my script, I had for several months, I just had the words "Harpy Scene."
Yes.
Across the top of the pages in my Arden text, because I just thought, oh God,
what are we going to do?
How on earth are we going to do this blessed Harpy Scene? And it inspired in me for months of preparing it. No excitement, no thrill of, oh good, we can do the Harpy Scene. I only felt dread. And then of course, as you get a bit closer and you begin to have more and more meetings with designers, then they begin to come up with wonderful ideas for how that might be. And then once we had Whitney, then she began to throw in ideas and brilliant movement director Julia and Max Pappenheim working away at the sound. And so, I mean, the Harpy Scene is aerial special effect, but it's also a theatrical special effect, basically, isn't it? It's a sort of invitation. I mean, did you find that, Whitney? It was always a bit like suddenly we were doing a musical whenever we got to the Harpy Scene.
I'm like, okay, time to do a bit of contemporary dance-esque movements. But yeah, it was quite strange, because obviously throughout the play, Ariel in our cast doesn't have her fellow minions. It's just me doing all of the tricks. So it kind of had that bit of a homegrown thing where it's like, the audience sees Ariel doing the harpy, but also it had to be scary enough for them to actually be afraid of it. So yeah, it was interesting to work through. But yeah, the costume really helped in terms of that, with the feathers, and Julia completely just changed everything in terms of how to move in a certain way, and how this scene in particular is different from the rest of Ariel's tricks.
And then the sound clip that Ciaran just played us obviously that's not recorded, is it? That's Whitney talking live, but wearing a mic that then processes her voice.
Amazing. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So how was that kind of like engaging with it on like quite a technical level? Because I presume, Hester, that's quite different to obviously the history of how that scene, presumably Shakespeare didn't intend it to be on a loop pedal or whatever it was.
I think he'd have had whatever he could have got his hands on for that. But what strikes me about that moment is that it's deeply strange, because the back-chatting, cynical, nasty courtiers could have come out of lots of plays of the 1610s at that point. And then we get blasted into this mode which is mythical and horrifying and must be frightening as well. But that's not enough, because the language that Ariel uses there is profoundly theological as well. So we have a creature who seems to have come not just from Ovid, like so much of the rest of this play, but from Greek tragedy almost, a figure of vengeance, of fury. But the language that they are using is the language of sin, which comes back again and again in this play. So it's profoundly unsettling. Just when we think we know what we might be getting, here's Ariel being a harpy, and everything that scene does in terms of its special effects, in terms of its movement, is going to jar with the expectations that we might have in the scene so far. And I was just looking up what I wrote about that scene, and I was reminded of those of you who know Philip Pullman's Dark Materials and the harpies who appear in the land of the dead, who are terrifying figures, but what they want is love, what they want is stories. And I don't think that's Greek at all in its associations, but it seemed an interesting note that the harpy is not just a figure of vengeance that may be like Ariel himself. The harpy here, for all that it's just another costume for Ariel, might have a kind of inner life, might have its own story, might have its own history that it's bringing to bear on this deeply strange, terrifying moment.
And an extraordinary thing then happens, because Alonso then describes what his experience of listening to the harpy was like. And Alonso has no memory of a harpy. So while the harpy was there, everyone is fully engaged with this bird woman creature. And then Alonso says, gosh, that was weird. I was just listening to the thunder and the wind and the billows of the waves, and I thought I heard in the wind that it said, prosper. It did base my trespass, and therefore my son in the ewes is bedded, so I'm going to seek him. Then ere plummet sounded, which is almost exactly the same as Prospero's line. And so Alonso's slightly leaping to conclusions diagnosis for himself there is that now he's got to go and jump in the sea too and be dead like his son, because he's guilty, because he's heard it in the wind. But the harpy's gone. It's like its job is done somehow.
I think one of the things that a lot of the late plays do is play tricks on the audience as much as they play tricks on the characters within them. And one of the tricks that the Tempest plays over and over again is it describes something that you haven't seen. And Cymbeline and The Winter's Tale do similar things. We could see them all as operating in the space that's been created in the astonishing Dover Cliff scene in King Lear, where you imagine something very, very vividly, but you don't know if it's there or not, and then you're told it wasn't there. And the Tempest does that over and over again. You get a wonderful evocation of something, but I didn't see that. And then you start almost remembering possibly seeing it. And here we have that mismatch between what Alonso has said that has just happened and what we've seen has just happened. And that's a very powerful, disorienting space for an audience to be in, because you think, well, I'm thinking really hard I'm imagining really, really hard, but I'm also deeply confused. And that's exciting, but also a very powerless state to be in. And I think the way in which that almost cognitive experience of the audience, how our imaginations and our memories and our faculties of interpretation are engaged, is something that's really powerful in this play. And because we're thinking, well, how are we going to do the harpy? How are we going to do all these effects? We perhaps don't pay as much attention to those moments where, no, you're not going to stage it, but you're going to imagine it. And that effect is going to be as powerful, as rich, as strange as anything that you could actually put on the stage.
Maybe we should move to, I've got another couple of clips here, to the end of the play.
Ariel, prepare the hat and garments in my cell. I will discase me, and myself present as I was sometime Milan. Quickly, spirit, thou shalt ere long be free.
Where the bee sucks, there suck I. In a cowslip's bell I lie. There I couch when owls do cry, when owls do cry. On the bat's back I do fly off to summer. Merrily, merrily, merrily shall I live now under the blossom that hangs on the bough. Where the bee sucks, there suck I, there suck I, there suck I.
Why, that's my dainty Ariel. I shall miss thee.
So beautiful. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that idea of song. So this is a genuine question from me. How did that feature as part of your adaptation, Tom? Was that something that, is that song written by our sound designer, by Max? Was that from music that was existed in the text itself? Because there's been a couple of different versions over the years, hasn't there?
Yeah, so all of the lyrics are Shakespeare's, but the music is Max's. I mean, Hester or Michael or Whitney might know more about this than I do. There are some transcriptions of the music that was used at a time either in the original production or pretty much contemporaneous with it, of a famous lutenist whose name was
Robert Johnson.
I got the Johnson bit, but I was
Robert
searching for the Robert.
Blues player in 1900.
Yeah, and so we do have, as with a few other Shakespeare plays like Twelfth Night and so on, there are some original tunes by credits by people who, if they had better agents, would still be getting royalties now. But no, they were all Max's. I mean, Max is kind of all written for Whitney. What was that? I was always banned from those rooms, Whitney. So what really happened? Because Max would just send me over little recordings of what you'd done, but I don't know what happened in the room.
You believe it?
It was lots to do with Max, but yeah, we kind of just played in terms of what felt comfortable in my vocal range. He definitely is the kind of like composer that's like prioritizes the lyrics and what the feel of the scene is first, and then like would do the sort of musical bits later. So yeah, it was just playing around, and when you're sort of playing around and you feel a bit naked, it was kind of like, okay, let's just do it together and then like show what Tom thinks of this, whether it'll be banished or something or anything. But yeah, it was definitely really interesting. I've never had songs written for me before, so that was really fun, and I loved working with Max. Like, yeah, he's basically a genius. So
this is Ariel's most fairy-like moment.
Yeah.
It reads a bit like an off-cut from Midsummer Night's Dream, partly because it's the cowslips. but also it's the moment where Ariel suddenly becomes diminutive, this tiny creature, and that notion of chasing after the summer is very moving. I think that this creature is not just zipping around the world doing things, but chasing after something which is always going to be fading, always going to be fleeting. So again, there's that playing with size and playing with speed and playing with something which is always just out of reach as well. It's a beautiful moment, and that's a very beautiful setting of it.
Yeah, and like she's so happy about being free and the promise of freedom that it's not like a speech. It's like, oh, I have to sing now, like a bit of like, not a musical sort of way, but I don't know, sometimes like things you can't say it like as in words. It just has to be on another level. So yeah.
Maybe we'll have a look then at Prospero's sort of, it's not really a similar freedom, is it? It's a different sort of situation.
Oh, release them, Ariel. My charms I'll break, their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves.
I'll fetch them, sir.
Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune and do fly him when he comes back. You demi-puppets, that by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make whereof the ewe not bites, and you whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms, that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid, weak masters though ye be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, call forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. The strong-based promontory have I made shake, and by the spurs plucked up the pine and cedar. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped, and led 'em forth by my so potent art. But this rough magic I here abjure, and when I have required some heavenly music, which even now I do, to work mine end upon their senses that this airy charm is for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than it ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book.
So I suppose that, I mean, you mentioned this moment, Michael, before earlier, didn't you? Sort of pointed to it. But it's a wonderful moment of kind of this ending. Hester, you speak a lot about the way that this sort of relates to like Prospero going back to where he belongs, I suppose, asking that question of, you know, what is this moment for Prospero?
It's very simple, it's very self-effacing, it's very honest, isn't it? And after all, that audience has been sitting there wondering for a long time what he's going to do, you know, and it's a sort of settling his account. And it's because it's Shakespeare, the language that pours out of Shakespeare at such a moment is so rapturous, it's so effortlessly beautiful. The choice of language, you know, it's a very, very, very moving thing to read on the page, and one's job is just to make it equally good in performance. It's boiled down to a simple matter of breaking a piece of stick and throwing it away, tearing up your favorite book, and then you're ready to go back like a refugee who's managing to get back to what is in the end his own country. But as I said before, I mean, you sort of notice not only the simplicity of I'll break my staff, I'll drown my book, but here stuff about the wind and the sea and the thunder and the ocean, how he stopped everything. I bedimmed the noontide sun. I mean, that's quite a claim. Call forth the mutinous winds. So those two things coexist. And the other element of it, of course, as we mentioned him before, is there is some message from Shakespeare, who'd entertained this audience for 35 years, probably signing off and having retired. And that is continued, in fact, a few moments later, at the very end of the play, when he has what's technically described as editors by an epilogue. Everybody leaves, but we did something slightly different with it, which I enjoyed very much with Ariel. But on the page, it's just Prospero as alone. And he says very directly to the audience, Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have is mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. So far he's talking about going home to the power and authority he had before. Let me not, since I have your dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands. This is the important bit. Release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. So he's asking for applause. Gentle breath of yours, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, must fill my sails, or else my project fails, which was to please. In other words, the whole of the last preceding 2 hours, there's been some method, some game that Prospero has invented to entertain the audience, which of course in a certain sense is true. Now I want spirits to enforce art to enchant, my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which changes so that it assaults virtue itself and clears all faults. As you from crimes would pardon be, he said to the person in stalls, row C, number 50. Let your indulgence set me free. I can pack up my makeup. I can pack up my case, my music case. I can pack up my scripts, and I can go home to Stratford, which is where I really belong. Because in Stratford, I have a huge amount of land, and I'm extremely aggressive and horrible landowner. And I overcharge for rentals and all the rest. So he lives the life of country squire, and that's how Shakespeare ended up. And then disease started, and he eventually died. This is not really what we're here to discuss, but I think he died of a thing called Scrivener's palsy, which is, I would suspect, very much like writer's cramp, that he became paralyzed in his hands. There's quite an interesting theory about this. He could no longer write. They call it Scrivener's palsy because he just written too much. 37 years and 154 sonnets. In that 37 plays, 154 sonnets in 20 years is going some. So it's a farewell, the whole passage of that act is a farewell, both in terms cosmically, operatically, grandly, a great magician at the height of his powers, but also of a humble actor who's playing the great magician. In a way, it's me speaking, not Prospero. It's a wonderful double trick that Shakespeare plays and gives the play this extraordinary feeling in its last moments, and that's one of the reasons it's so great. So.
One of the things that strikes me about what you just said and about the epilogue and about Prospero abjuring his rough magic is that there is a constant tension between things coming to an end and wanting to delay.
Yes.
So we think about Ariel, whose freedom, whose release is always being delayed, always being promised. But one of the things that's so characteristic of Prospero's verse, and this is pretentiously technical, but the syntax is very often inverted and the main verb is very often delayed. And the line very often breaks on the half line. Yeah. So that you think, I know where the speech is going, but I haven't got to the end of it yet. And it's not till you get to, I'll drown my book, that it really hits home, or set me free. And that sense of immense emotion and the performance of giving something up at the same time as it's being delayed as long as possible. And the play is so invested in, this is happening at the moment of crisis. This must happen now. This is the moment when Miranda will be told everything and all the plots will come to a head, and it's happening more or less in real time. But my word, it's going to spin it out and have some wonderful things along the way. And that's going to be both at the large level of the effects and the astonishing encounters and spectacles and beautiful speeches along the way. But it's there at the micro level of actually how the lines, how the sentences are constructed. You have to really stick with them to get the point. And I think that's what Milton borrows from Shakespeare, but we won't go there.
No, no, you're right, though. I think you're right.
There's also there's something wonderful about it's strange, isn't it, in this current moment of most of the work that is being made or viewed now and consumed online is missing something, isn't it, which is the contract that is spoken of by Prospero at the end there, where he says, I can't get out unless you applaud. There's a bargain here. At the end of All's Well That Ends Well, which is the Shakespeare I did immediately prior to the Tempest, the last couplet is, ours be your patience then, we'll do the silent bit, and yours our parts, your gentle hands lend us and take our hearts. And this that thing of swapping roles right
Yeah.
at the end of the end of the play, and it's there at the end of As You Like It and at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream and so many plays. But the text itself constantly reminds you of the exchange that happens between an audience and actors in a live theatre situation. My cast at the end of All's Well That Ends Well always used to say very, very, very quietly, "And take our hearts for money." In exchange for us spilling our guts on stage for 3 hours, you pay up.
Half of lager.
But also clap, laugh, cry with us. That exchange, which is what is so missing for us at the moment, and what you can't ever quite get, however wonderful film and television may be. That moment of exchange is a uniquely theatrical moment.
Yeah.
Well, I for one can't wait to see it back on stage, hopefully. And yeah, thank you all so much for that chat. That was really, really lovely. Thank you for listening to the final episode of Jermyn Street Theatre's Prompt Corner podcast. If you haven't listened to all the other podcasts, you can check them out on our YouTube page or on our social media. And if you've enjoyed them, do let us know. Send through a comment or send us a message. Looking forward to catch you with some more upcoming projects of ours. For now, bye-bye.